Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
My brother cracked the crystal on my Omega Speedmaster, a watch I bought for myself after I landed a major promotion, and he looked me dead in the face and said, with this smug little grin like he thought it was charming or something, "Oops. Don't be dramatic." And I didn't lose it. I didn't scream or slam a door or cry or even raise my voice. I just looked at him and said, okay. Because what he didn't know, and this is important, is that I'd already moved the warranty into his name. Yeah, a few weeks earlier, I'd had this feeling, just this gut-level nudge, and I followed it. I printed out the warranty transfer form, caught him while he was distracted one day, and had him sign it. Told him it was something for insurance. He didn't even read it. Just scribbled his name, and went back to whatever game he was playing on his phone. I know how that sounds. I know. But you have to understand, this wasn't just about a watch. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was the latest in a long, long list of moments where Brad, my younger brother, treated me like I was just some side character in his Golden Boy storyline. And my parents stood there and acted like he'd just tripped over a shoelace instead of stomped all over something that mattered to me. This watch, this very specific watch, wasn't just expensive. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. I bought it the day after I got offered a regional leadership role I'd spent years clawing toward. I didn't tell anyone at first, not even my fiancé, because it felt so personal, like I wanted one small celebration that didn't have to be shared or explained or toned down. So I walked into the boutique, picked it out, paid for it outright, and told myself, this is proof. You did something big. You earned this. Brad had always been the kind of person who could break something important and laugh it off. Growing up, he ran over my bike with his car when we were teenagers, blamed it on bad visibility, and our mom told me to be grateful he even drove me places. When we were in college, he downloaded a virus on my laptop because he wanted to stream something sketchy, and I lost half a semester's worth of projects. My parents just asked why I didn't back things up better. When he got pulled over twice in 1 week for reckless driving, my dad made a few calls, and it was brushed under the rug. But when I missed curfew by 10 minutes in high school, I was grounded for a week. When I didn't come home one Christmas because I was closing year-end deals, they called me selfish. Brad doesn't get held accountable, that's the rule. It's been the rule since we were kids. So when he cracked my watch and gave me that fake sweet, dismissive oops, I knew exactly what was coming. The minimization. The guilt trips. The subtle family gaslighting that somehow made me the problem for being upset. That night, my parents came over for dinner, just a casual thing my fiancé Steve and I had planned. Nothing fancy. Brad was already there when they arrived, and he was acting like everything was fine. We hadn't said much since the incident earlier that afternoon, just a few icy words exchanged over the kitchen island. But I was calm. I had no interest in playing the usual emotional chess game where I express frustration and then get punished for it. So I waited until we were all sitting down, passing salad and sipping wine, and I said, with the most neutral tone I could manage, by the way, Brad cracked my Speedmaster today. You'd think I said he parked in the wrong spot. That was the level of reaction I got. My mom literally rolled her eyes. She rolled them and said, "Oh, that's not a big deal. It's just a watch." My dad barely looked up from his plate. "Accidents happen," he mumbled. "Brad?" He laughed. That same condescending smirk, like I was being overly emotional again. It was already scratched, probably. You shouldn't leave expensive stuff lying around if you're going to freak out about it. I felt this wave of pressure, like someone was holding both hands on either side of my chest and pushing, pushing, pushing. Not one of them asked if it could be fixed, or if I was okay, or even if I'd been planning to wear it somewhere important. No one thought to take responsibility or at least pretend to care. And I realized right then that this had to be the last time. This couldn't just be one more family moment where I swallowed my feelings and smiled through clenched teeth. So I said nothing more about it. I smiled, changed the subject, let them move on like it didn't matter. But in my head, I was already 3 steps ahead. I'd moved the warranty into his name 3 weeks earlier. I'd done it after I caught him, yet again, rifling through my things while looking for phone chargers or snacks or who knows what. That time, he picked up the watch, turned it over in his hand, and made some joke about how one day I'd probably forget I even owned it. And that little voice in the back of my mind, the one that usually whispers, "Let it go," it said something different. It said, "Protect your stuff. Because nobody else will." So I pulled up the manufacturer's warranty policy, saw they allowed a one-time ownership transfer with a signature, and printed it. Next time he asked to use my printer, I casually handed him the paper. "Just something for my insurance folder," I said. "Need your signature since you're down as backup contact." He didn't even ask what it was. He signed, handed it back, and went to microwave his leftover takeout. So yeah, when he broke it, cracked the crystal, dismissed it, and told me not to be dramatic, I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to cry or yell or play the martyr like I usually did. I just needed to wait for the system to kick in. For the warranty department to pull up his name. For the email to go out. For the customer service calls to start coming in. And when it did, I wouldn't need to say a word. Let me ask you something. If someone cracks your car window, shrugs it off, and tells you to chill, would you pay for the repair? Because I didn't. And neither did he. Not yet. But he was about to. You know, if I had to name the exact moment I realized Brad had never really been held accountable for anything in his life, it probably wouldn't have even been about something big. It would have been that time in high school when he broke my bike by backing into it with Dad's car, barely looked up from his phone, and said it was in the way, while my mom stood behind him saying, "Well, it's just a bike." And then they looked at me, like I was supposed to just accept that explanation, like I was the unreasonable one for expecting someone, anyone, to say, "Hey, that sucks. What do you need to replace it?" That was the first time I really felt the imbalance, the invisible rulebook we were all supposed to follow, where Brad could trip over his own shoelaces and someone else, usually me, would end up apologizing for putting the rug in his way. That dynamic never changed, not in college, not in our 20s, and certainly not now, when we're both adults and should, by all accounts, be capable of taking responsibility for our own actions. When Brad cracked my Omega and told me, "Don't be dramatic," I didn't just hear those words, I heard every version of them I've heard since I was 12. "Don't overreact, he didn't mean it, you're being too sensitive, can't you just let it go?" And all of it, every last drop of it, carried the same message. Keeping the peace was my job, even when someone else made the mess. There's this thing that happens in families, and I've talked to enough friends to know it's not just mine. There's often a designated adult, even if they were never officially given the title, who is expected to absorb impact, diffuse tension, and smooth over conflict before it spreads. In our family, that person was always me. Not because I was better at it, not because I was stronger or more emotionally mature, but because I was willing to do it. I was willing to carry it so the others didn't have to feel uncomfortable for more than 5 seconds at a time. Brad knew this. Our parents definitely knew it. And the problem with being the reasonable one for too long is that eventually everyone just expects it of you. Like it's your role. Like your patience is part of the furniture. And honestly, I think Brad truly believed that no matter what he did, whether it was damaging something I owned, or making a passive-aggressive joke at my expense, or pushing boundaries that weren't his to cross, I would just do what I always did, brush it off, put on a smile, and move on. But this time I didn't. This time I'd been prepared. When I told Steve, my fiancé, what had happened with the watch, I expected him to be annoyed or maybe just roll his eyes and say something like, "That's Brad for you," because even he'd seen the pattern over the years. But instead, he looked at me for a long moment, nodded once, and said, "Want me to say something to him?" And the truth is, part of me did. Part of me wanted someone else to finally jump in and defend me instead of watching from the sidelines. But instead of answering right away, I walked over to the drawer in my office, pulled out the warranty form, and handed it to Steve without saying a word. He unfolded it slowly, looked it over, and then looked back at me with this half-smile that said, "Oh, you already handled it." And I had. I'd handled it weeks before Brad even broke the watch, and not because I was paranoid or dramatic or looking for a fight, but because I'd learned the hard way that I couldn't count on other people to protect the things that mattered to me. When I first bought the Omega, I registered the warranty under my own name like you're supposed to, but something about the way Brad kept eyeing it, not in a flattering way, not like someone admiring craftsmanship, but like someone who believed it should be as eventually, made me nervous. He made a comment one night about how he'd probably end up with it when you get bored of it, like I was just a temporary holder of something that would someday be his, and I swear to you, something in my brain just clicked. So I read the fine print, saw that the brand allowed a one-time warranty transfer, printed the form, and waited for the right moment. It came a week later. Brad was in our kitchen, rummaging around for something to snack on while waiting for his DoorDash order, and I casually said I needed a quick signature for some paperwork I was organizing for insurance tracking. I handed him the form and pointed to the line. He didn't even glance at the text. Just signed, handed it back, and went back to scrolling his phone. That's the part that still gets me, the entitlement, the laziness, the absolute certainty that nothing he signed could ever come back to bite him. He trusted that I would never, ever do anything that would inconvenience him, no matter what he did to me. Because that's how it had always been. He was the golden child, not because he was perfect or successful or even particularly hardworking, but because my parents had decided, consciously or not, that his comfort was worth more than my boundaries. The golden child clause, that unspoken rule that one kid's peace is worth more than the other's patience, had shaped our whole dynamic. And for the first time in my life, I'd found a loophole. I didn't have to scream or argue or lay out a dramatic speech about fairness and respect. I didn't have to play the emotional referee in my own damn family anymore. I just had to sign the right form, file it quietly, and wait. The thing about Brad is that he's used to consequences being optional. He's used to women, his sister, his mother, even past girlfriends, cleaning up after him, fixing what he breaks, and calming the waters he stirs up. But this time, there was no emotional rescue, no built-in forgiveness, no invisible cleanup crew waiting behind the scenes. And the best part? He didn't even know yet. He had no idea that the email from the watch manufacturer was already on its way. No idea that his name was now officially attached to both the product and the problem. And absolutely no idea that for once in his life, he was going to have to deal with the fallout, not because someone made him, but because I made sure the system did. When the phone rang the next morning, I knew, without even glancing at the caller ID, that it would be my mother, and that she wouldn't be calling to ask how I slept or how work was going or whether Steve and I had finalized our wedding venue. No. I knew with absolute certainty that her voice would already be tense before I even said hello, and that the first words out of her mouth would be loaded with passive-aggressive concern, the kind that sounds like love if you're not listening too closely, but is really just a thinly veiled attempt to steer the conversation back to what she wanted to hear, that I had decided to forgive Brad because forgiveness, in our family, has never been about healing. It has always been about maintaining a hierarchy where one person's feelings matter and the other person's job is to accommodate them. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. He told me what happened with the watch, she said, like she was addressing a customer service issue at a store she didn't want to be in. I just think this is all getting blown way out of proportion, and it's honestly really upsetting that you would go to such lengths over something so small. Small. That was the word she used. Not damaged, not cracked, not expensive or meaningful or even worth acknowledging. Just small, like my reaction was the only thing out of scale. And I sat there, staring at the wall, phone pressed against my ear, not sure whether I wanted to laugh or scream or hang up. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I said calmly, he broke something that mattered to me, dismissed it like it was nothing, and now he has to take care of it. That's not petty. That's accountability. You could almost hear the gears turning as she tried to reframe it, to find the angle that would put me back in my place. But honey, she said in that syrupy tone she uses when she's about to say something manipulative and pretend it's wisdom, he's your brother. He didn't mean to. And you know how he gets when he feels attacked. I just think you're being a little rigid about this. It's not like he can afford to pay for something like that right now. There it was, the real reason for the call. Not concern for me, not confusion about what had happened, but a quiet plea, wrapped in guilt, to back off before Brad had to deal with real consequences. She wasn't worried about his feelings being hurt. She was worried he might have to pay for what he broke, with his own time or money or reputation, and that idea was apparently more upsetting than the fact that he had, once again, treated me and my things with complete disregard. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't go into a long explanation about how the watch had sentimental value, how I'd worked my ass off for that promotion, or how I was tired, so incredibly tired, of always being the one expected to extend grace when nobody extended it to me. I just said, it's under warranty. It's being repaired. The company's handling it. And it's in his name. That's all. Silence. Long enough that I could practically feel the discomfort radiating through the phone. Finally, she said, "You changed the ownership?" Without telling him. I waited a beat before answering. He signed the form. He didn't ask what it was. That's not my fault. She tried to spin it, of course she did. That's not fair. You knew he wouldn't read it. That's sneaky, don't you think? You manipulated him. And I'll admit, for a split second, I felt it, that old, familiar twist of guilt in my gut, the kind I'd been trained to feel any time someone disapproved of me not letting Brad walk all over me. But it didn't last. Because the truth was, he signed it. I didn't forge his name. I didn't lie. I gave him a document, and like he always does, he assumed nothing could come back to him. That wasn't manipulation. That was just me finally using the same carelessness he always relied on against him. He's a grown man, I said, my voice still steady. If he signs something without reading it, that's on him. He had no problem picking up the watch without asking. Now it's his problem. She tried one last push, the nuclear option. You know, I raised you to be better than this. I thought you were the one who kept this family grounded. And that right there, that was the family heirloom. Not jewelry, not stories, not traditions passed down with pride. It was guilt. Guilt so finely tuned it could cut through your spine in 3 words. Guilt wrapped in phrases like, I thought you were the reasonable one, or be the bigger person, or it's not worth it, just let it go. Guilt designed to keep everything in balance, their balance, even when it meant tipping me over completely. I paused before I spoke again, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted her to hear it clearly, without noise or background or emotional static. I'm done being the one who always absorbs the damage so no one else has to be uncomfortable. He broke it. He's responsible. End of story. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just sighed, this deep, exhausted sigh that made it sound like I'd somehow betrayed her by refusing to play the part she'd cast me in decades ago. And then she hung up, without saying goodbye. Steve walked into the room about a minute later, holding 2 mugs of coffee, and when he saw my face, he didn't ask what happened. He just handed me the mug and sat down beside me in silence, like he knew I didn't need comfort. I needed the space to let that moment settle in and harden, to solidify the choice I'd made. We didn't speak for a while. Eventually, he looked over and said, "You okay?" I nodded. Yeah, just wondering how long it's going to take them to realize I'm not going to back down this time. And the answer came later that evening, in the form of an email forwarded from the warranty department. Subject line, repair claim filed, additional verification required. Recipient, Brad. Sender, Omega Watches. I opened the email. They'd contacted him directly, asking him to confirm ownership and schedule the repair delivery to a service center in his state. No mention of me. No involvement required on my end. It was all on him now, the scheduling, the packaging, the follow-up, the hassle. And while part of me wondered whether he'd handle it responsibly or just try to throw a tantrum until someone bailed him out, a bigger part of me didn't care. Because for once, it wasn't my mess to clean up. By the time Brad finally called me, not texted, not left a voice note, but actually called me like it was 1999 and he wanted to make sure I heard every syllable, I already knew the email had reached him, and I already knew. From the timestamp on the forwarded message and the confirmation from the service center, that he'd read it twice. Not just opened it, not just glanced at the subject line and ignored it, but read it fully, probably more than once, trying to understand what the hell he'd gotten himself into. And when the call came through and I picked up, I didn't even say hello, I just waited, because I knew whatever was about to come out of his mouth was going to be a mixture of outrage, confusion, and that pathetic wounded tone he always used when someone finally told him no. His voice came through sharp, already halfway to yelling. What the hell is this email from Omega? Why is this watch in my name? I leaned back in my chair and said, as flatly as I could, "You signed the ownership transfer form, Brad. That means the warranty is under your name. You broke the crystal, so they reached out to you for the repair. That's how warranties work." He didn't like that answer. Not because it was wrong, but because it didn't leave any wiggle room for him to pretend he was the victim. He sputtered for a second, trying to catch a thread of moral high ground, and then went straight for the usual route, outrage disguised as principle. That's manipulative as hell. You didn't tell me what I was signing. You tricked me. I didn't bother pretending to be surprised. I didn't even deny it. I just said, slowly, like I was explaining something to a particularly dense coworker, "You signed it. You didn't ask what it was. That's on you. It's not my job to babysit your decision-making process." He swore under his breath, called me controlling, and then tried to pull the financial card, the one he always saved for last. "I can't afford to get this thing fixed. You know how much this is going to cost me? This isn't a joke. I don't even want your stupid watch. Why would you do this to me?" That question, "Why would you do this to me?" landed with such a heavy thud of irony that I almost laughed, because what he didn't realize was that he'd been doing things to me for the better part of 3 decades, and I had eaten it, forgiven it, brushed it off. Because that was what everyone expected me to do. And the one time, I finally let him carry the weight of his own carelessness, he acted like I'd pushed him off a cliff. "I didn't do anything to you, Brad," I said, calm and cold. "You broke my watch. You smirked and told me not to be dramatic. So now you're handling the repair. That's not revenge. That's just cause and effect." He hung up. Didn't say goodbye, didn't try to argue further, just ended the call with the kind of dramatic finger stab to the screen that I could practically hear through the silence. I put my phone down, walked into the kitchen, and made myself a cup of tea like it was any other Tuesday, because in my mind, this was already over. He had the paperwork. He had the damage. He had the responsibility. It was no longer my concern. But of course, with Brad, nothing is ever straightforward. 2 days later, I got a group text from my mother. Just a screenshot of a message Brad had forwarded to her, along with her commentary. "Can we please resolve this without turning it into a legal situation?" A legal situation. That was the phrase she used, as if I'd filed a lawsuit instead of just held her son responsible for the physical damage he'd caused. I didn't respond. Steve didn't respond either, even though I showed him the message, and he raised an eyebrow like he was genuinely impressed at the level of delusion involved. And then came the next part, the part I'd been expecting but still relished when it finally happened. The manufacturer required Brad to bring the watch, in person, to the nearest certified service center for verification. They needed to confirm the serial number, inspect the damage, match it to the file, and verify ownership. Which meant Brad, who lived 4 hours away in a different state, couldn't just drop it off at my place or shove it in a padded envelope and hope someone else dealt with it. He had to schedule an appointment, drive down to the service center, sit in the waiting area like a regular human being, and explain, out loud, to a technician what happened. I could practically hear the sound of his ego cracking, louder, maybe, than the shattered crystal itself. He dragged it out for almost 2 weeks, first trying to get my parents to intervene, then trying to get Steve to talk some sense into her, and finally trying to bribe our mutual cousin into taking it in for him. Nobody bit. And eventually, out of pure resignation, or maybe just to stop the bleeding, he did what he should have done from the start. He got in his car, drove down, and took care of it. Not because he wanted to do the right thing, but because every exit had been sealed off, and this was the only option left. That should have been the end of it. But life and warranty policies rarely wrap up that neatly. 2 weeks after his visit to the service center, he received another email. This one wasn't from the scheduling department. It was from the billing department. And it wasn't good news. The technicians had reviewed the damage and determined that the crystal had been broken due to misuse, excessive external force not covered under the standard warranty terms. The repair wouldn't be free. The total cost, including parts, labor, and expedited shipping, was $985. And, because he had submitted the claim under his name and had provided a credit card for incidentals at the time of the appointment, a card that was now linked to the repair order, the charge had already been processed. He tried to fight it. Of course he did. Sent a furious email to the brand, claimed he had been manipulated, tried to reverse the charge with his credit card company. But none of it stuck. He had submitted the paperwork. He had signed the ownership form. He had brought in the watch himself. It didn't matter how loudly he screamed afterward, the system didn't care about family drama. It just processed what was in front of it. And for the first time in maybe forever, Brad felt what it was like to have no safety net beneath him. No mom to call the school. No dad to pull some strings. No big sister to fix it quietly so no one had to hear about it again. He cracked something. And he paid for it. Literally. By the time the payment hit Brad's credit card and the dust had started to settle, at least externally, I figured we'd all go into that usual family-wide state of artificial calm, the one where everyone pretends things are fine not because they are, but because no one has the stomach to deal with any more tension. I thought, maybe naively, that the moment of accountability had finally run its course. He had broken the watch. I had taken a step back and allowed the consequences to unfold without cleaning up his mess for him. And the manufacturer had done its part by holding the responsible person, for once, actually responsible. But apparently, Brad wasn't done yet. Apparently, having to pay for the damage he caused wasn't just an inconvenience for him. It was a full-blown assault on his identity. One that he needed the entire family to rally behind, so he could climb back up to the pedestal where he was used to standing. I woke up one morning to a group text, not just to me but to our entire immediate family, Mom, Dad, me, and Steve, who had no business being dragged into this, but was looped in anyway. The message was classic Brad, self-pity dressed up as righteous anger. He sent a screenshot of the final billing statement, circled the charge, and then added a paragraph so theatrical I had to read it twice to make sure he was serious. "I hope you're all happy," it said. "She scammed her own brother, let me walk into a financial trap, and you all just stood by and watched. I've been nothing but supportive my whole life, and this is how I get treated? Unbelievable. If you think I'm going to show up for Thanksgiving and pretend everything's okay, think again." And that was the moment it hit me, really hit me, that Brad wasn't just mad about the money, he was furious about the shift in power, the fact that I'd outmaneuvered him in a way that was clean, legal, and unarguably fair, and that no one, not even our parents, had managed to stop it. He wasn't used to losing, especially not to me, and especially not in a way that didn't involve shouting, accusations, or emotional blackmail. He had walked himself right into the trap, and, because it was done with paperwork, not revenge or confrontation, there was nothing he could scream at to undo it. My mother, predictably, jumped in next. Not directly to me, of course. That would have required taking a position and potentially saying something she couldn't walk back, but to the group, with one of her classic thinly veiled guilt bombs. This family is falling apart. I don't know what happened to forgiveness or grace. We used to be able to count on each other. That line, "we used to be able to count on each other," was so carefully aimed at me that it almost felt like a compliment, like she was admitting that I'd been the glue for so long and was now refusing to play that role, and that the only way they knew how to function was with me constantly patching the cracks and smoothing things over. It didn't even make me angry. It just made me tired. Steve, bless him, stayed quiet for most of it, until Brad sent another message directly to him, this one clearly fishing for backup. "Dude," Brad wrote, "you've seen what she's like. You seriously think this was fair?" And Steve, who almost never involves himself in family politics and avoids drama like it's radioactive, replied with a single sentence that made me want to hug him. "You broke the watch. You dismissed it. You fixed it. Grow up." That was it. No fluff. No explanation. Just the facts. And not a single person responded after that. The silence in the group chat stretched across the rest of the day, into the next, and then the next, until it was clear that no one knew what to say, because the script had been flipped and none of them had learned their lines yet. Thanksgiving rolled around a week later, and I already knew Brad wouldn't show. He'd made that perfectly clear in his message, and even if he'd wanted to come, his pride wouldn't have let him walk through the door and pretend nothing had happened. Part of me wondered whether my parents would cancel the gathering or suggest rescheduling so everyone could be there, but they didn't. Maybe they were tired too. Maybe, in their own quiet way, they knew the balance had finally shifted, and trying to force it back would only make it worse. Dinner was awkward in the way family dinners get when something's broken and no one wants to acknowledge it. My dad carved the turkey like he was performing surgery, meticulous and silent, and my mom kept her eyes on the table as if she could will the conversation into existence without actually starting one. Steve and I talked about work, about house projects, about nothing of consequence. No one mentioned Brad. At one point, halfway through the meal, I stood up, walked into the hallway, and came back holding a small box, the repaired Omega, polished and restored, sitting neatly in its case. I didn't say anything. I just placed it gently on the dining table and sat back down. My mother glanced at it, then at me, and then back at her plate. No one touched it. Eventually, I broke the silence. "It's fixed now," I said, softly but firmly. And I didn't have to pay for it. Still, no one spoke. The weight of what I wasn't saying, the decades of swallowing feelings, the constant pressure to forgive and forget, the years of keeping the family dynamic intact at the cost of my own boundaries, was so present that it might as well have been another guest at the table. My father, after what felt like an hour but was probably 30 seconds, finally said, maybe he needed to learn what it feels like. That was it. No grand speech, no apology, just a quiet admission that maybe, just maybe, things had gone too far too many times, and someone finally said enough. I didn't stay long after dessert. I didn't linger for coffee or try to pretend everything had returned to normal. Before we left, I stood up, picked up my keys from the side table, and without looking at anyone in particular, I said, next time someone breaks my trust, I'll make sure the warranty's in their name again too. As we stepped outside into the cold, Steve put his arm around me, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had actually done something that mattered, not to them, maybe, but to me. I didn't scream. I didn't seek revenge in some explosive, emotionally satisfying way. I just waited, and when the moment came, I handed Brad the responsibility he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. And he had no choice but to carry it. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about the principle, about drawing a line in the sand that didn't need to be defended with anger or tears, just facts, signatures, and follow-through. And for once, I wasn't the one eating the cost to keep the peace. I wasn't the emotional trash they dumped their mess into. I was just a woman who'd had enough, who played the long game, and who won on her terms. Brad still hasn't apologized. I doubt he ever will. But I don't need it anymore. Because at the end of the day, he cracked my watch and told me not to be dramatic. And I turned that little crack into the cleanest break of my life.